everyone, Christina here. Welcome to day 9 of the holiday card series for 2016. Today I'm going to be creating a background using the Diagonal Stripes background stamp from Simon Says Stamp, as well as 3 different colors of green ink. I'm using Green Apple, Fern, and Midnight Green, and I'm going to be stamping these in a way that makes them look like they're seamlessly blending from one color to the next. This is a technique that I think I've seen Jennifer McGuire do multiple times in different ways. I think it was Jennifer that did this, and I thought it would just be fun to use those 3 colors in that way. So I'm using a MISTI tool, and I put my paper down into the bottom corner, and I'm doing it this way because I'm using some paper that's cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and this background stamp is going to stamp edge to edge without any space for magnets to hold that paper down. So I'm using that bottom corner of the MISTI tool to aid me in making sure that that paper doesn't move. So if the paper shifts at all after stamping, I can just slide it back down to that corner. I've made sure I have some grid paper behind my cardstock that I'm stamping on so it'll catch any of the stamping off the edge. And then I inked up that background stamp with the Green Apple ink, pressing that down with my fingertips and my hands to make sure you get a really good impression. And then as I swing the door back, you'll see where my cardstock was right on that side. So now I know where to ink up my background stamp. So I'm moving on to the second color. This color is Fern, and I'm just putting the ink on about the bottom 3/4. And then I'm taking a clean paper towel and dabbing off some of that color at the very top edge of that ink that I applied to the stamp. This is going to soften that top edge and make it so it blends in with the lighter color that's already been stamped, a little bit easier than it would anyway. So I'll go ahead and swing that back over. You can see that it transitions a little bit, but I've sort of missed that center area. So I'll swing that back over and press down the center and that ink transfers. That's the amazing part about using a MISTI tool, is that if there are areas that you somehow miss or you don't have your the entire surface area pressed down evenly, you can just stamp it again and it will transfer the ink. So now I'm doing the same thing with the Midnight Green color, except I've only put the ink on about the bottom third. And I went to another section of clean paper towel and wiped off just a little bit at that top edge. And then I'll swing that over, and then you can see how it intensified the green color at the bottom of the cardstock. I'm going to do this a few more times, just trying to get that more seamless blend of color. It was a little too stark this last round, so I'm doing it one more time. You won't have any problem stamping this over and over again as long as you always make sure the cardstock is down in that bottom corner and that your stamp doesn't move. That's the joyful and amazing thing about the MISTI tool. It makes restamping images so easy. So I've moved back to the middle color, which is Fern, and I'm just going to intensify that color in the center area because I felt like there wasn't enough transition between all of the colors. So I'm wiping that harsh edge off like I did on the other stampings, and then I'll go ahead and swing this over. If you wanted to get a similar look but not have to deal with all of the wiping off with a paper towel and things like that, you could instead stamp and emboss the striped lines, so just a clear embossing powder or a white embossing powder, and then take in a blending tool with the 3 colors and blend it onto the cardstock from there. That's another way you could get a similar look like this without having to deal with, multiple stampings or even using a stamping tool like the MISTI. So I'll swing that over one more time. And this will be the last stamping that I do for this. I decided to just call it. I think that was pretty good. It's not as even across as I would have hoped, but pretty close. I've trimmed down that piece to be 3 3/4 wide by 5 1/2. And now I'm going to take the Happy Christmas stamp from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to be stamping and embossing it on heat-resistant acetate from hot off the press. Cut that down to a smaller piece, and then I'm going to prep this acetate by spritzing it with some water and wiping it off with a paper towel. I got this tip from one of you guys that said that you can really help eliminate a lot of the static cling that makes embossing powder stick to areas that you don't want by putting the whole piece of acetate in water or spritzing it with water, and also using a powder tool or an anti-sag powder tool very generously on the acetate. You can wipe it off later so it's nice and clean, but you really want a lot of powder on there. That's really going to make sure you get a good impression. So I put that acetate in my MISTI tool. You can't see it because it's clear. And then stamped my greeting stamp in Versamark ink. It picked up the acetate because it's really sticky, and I can peel that off the stamp and I have my stamped image. I sprinkled on some Hero Arts white embossing powder, and at this point I was holding my breath, really hoping that all of my measures that I took before stamping helped, and it worked beautifully. I had no stray embossing powder anywhere on the acetate, and as soon as the acetate had cooled down enough that I was able to use my fingertips and just wipe away all of that powder, and it looked perfect and pristine. I even took a paper towel and just made sure I got everything off. Now I'm going to use the stitched circle die set from Simon Says Stamp, taking the largest circle, and I'm just sizing that up, making sure it'll fit my greeting area. And then I'm going to die cut a circle out of my diagonal striped piece. So I'll just use a little bit of Post-it tape to hold that in place, and then I round that through my Big Shot machine. So I'm going to create a shaker card. I'm going to use this to create a shaker area. So the first thing I'm going to do is adhere my plastic down onto my front window piece using some Ranger multi-medium matte adhesive for this, and I will go ahead and place that down. The thing I really like about using liquid adhesive is if you have it shift while you're applying it, like right here, it kind of moved around a little, you're still able to move it even more and get it into the right position. My acetate was a little bit too big, so I just trimmed it off the sides, sizing it up to the actual diagonal piece that I created. And then now I'm going to create the foam area. So I'm taking some foam tape and doubling it back on itself so that it is 2 layers thick. And then I will take my scissors and I'm going to cut this into a very narrow strip. You'll notice there's not much space on the sides of that circle, so I want to make sure that my foam tape isn't wider than those areas. I'm going to remove the backing or the release paper off both sides of this foam tape, and by removing the release paper on both sides, it allows me to bend and form my foam around the circle area. This makes making shaker cards so super easy, and before I would have to cut a bunch of little strips and apply them all and make sure there were no gaps. But when you do it like this and you just take the release paper off both sides, it makes it super easy to create molded or shaped shaker areas. So I'm applying a little bit of that anti-sag powder tool just around the edges. That'll take away some of the stickiness that might make sequins or other elements in my shaker area stick to the sides. And then I'm going to start putting in a bunch of different little bits and pieces to shake around. So I'm using some little seed beads and some flat circular sequins. I also have some regular red sequins that are going to go in there as well. And I'm just making sure that I have this area filled pretty well with all of my elements because I want to make sure that it just reads as super red. So I'll add even more beads in there. And then I'm going to take some red cardstock. This is Schoolhouse red cardstock from Simon Says Stamp, and that is going to be the back piece on my shaker area. So I put foam pieces to fill in the rest of those areas and then put the red cardstock right on top. This red cardstock is cut to the same exact size as the diagonal striped piece, and I thought it would be really fun to have a little peak of red on the sides when you kind of look at it. You can see as I tip it that there's just a little bit of red. I wrapped some white embroidery floss around this piece here and then tied it in a bow. And then I'm going to apply some adhesive on the back, and I'll be putting it on my card base. My card base today is made out of some Neenah Desert Storm cardstock, and it's scored at 5.5 to create a top folding 5.5 by 4.25 card. I'm using some Tombow Extreme adhesive to adhere that down onto the card, and then I can place it down right on top. And this is where you can see that little peak of red on the sides as you tip it to make it shake. I think it's kind of a fun little element and a way to bring more red into the card. So that's it for day 9. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card video. I will be back on Friday with day 10, and thank you so much for watching.